Well, there are two ways to look at this. One is to just kind of stack up the rosters next to each other and say who's better here, who's better there. And that's a fun endeavor. And then the other way is to kind of look at matchups, O line versus D line. So we'll do it quickly, just kind of go through both ways. Maybe you look at quarterback. I think that's obviously an advantage Ohio State. I think they have not only the better starter, the proven starter, they have very good depth. I like the young quarterback that they have who played a little bit last year. I think Devin Brown's a little overrated, but he's a decent player and he's your third or fourth quarterback. Running back, I like Notre Dame's depth better than Ohio State's, but Travion Henderson is significantly better than anybody else has. So if you're looking starter, it's Ohio State. If you're looking depth, it's Notre Dame. But that starter part is really, really important. Wide receiver, right now, I'd give the edge to Ohio State. Obviously, Jackson Smith and Jig was better than anybody Notre Dame has. They have very good depth. I think Notre Dame's depth is gonna be better than people think, but it would be unwise and very homerish if I was going to start trying to say, oh no, they're as good as Ohio State. I think Ohio State has the best receiving core in the country coming back. So that's where you start to see some Ohio State have some big advantages. Notre Dame, huge advantage at tight end. I think Notre Dame has the advantage at offensive line as well. I think they have more talent top to bottom than Ohio State does on the offensive line. So offensively, Ohio State has the advantage of quarterback with CJ Stroud. They also have very good depth. They have the advantage when it comes to the top of the running back depth chart. I like Notre Dame's depth better, but advantage Ohio State there. They have an advantage at receiver, a significant one if you're gonna include the top level player plus the projected talent of the others. But I think that the depth is where Notre Dame can close the gap. If guys like Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey and Deion Colesy and Tobias Merriweather can be the players I think they can be, the gap won't be as large in practice as it is right now on paper. Tight end, big advantage Notre Dame. O-line, advantage Notre Dame. Not by a ton, but advantage Notre Dame. Defensively, this is where it's kind of the opposite story for me. Defensive line, I think Notre Dame has a better defensive line. Now, I know Ohio State has a bunch of five-star players, but Isaiah Foskey has had more sacks last year than the top four returning defensive linemen for Ohio State, defensive ends for Ohio State. And if you take recruiting rankings, and this is like a silly tweet that I saw the other day where they were comparing the Ohio State receivers to the Notre Dame DBs, and they just use recruiting rankings. Like Julian Fleming's a five-star. Julian Fleming's done nothing at Ohio State. They had Cam Hart like he's the number 600 something player in the country. Does anyone still think that's who Cam Hart is? That's a silly comparison, and that's for people who really don't know football and don't have a way to make an argument based on evaluation. They just pull silly, arbitrary things like recruiting rankings and act like that just means what a guy's going to be. But if you look at talent, if you look at production, if you look at what they've actually done on the field, Notre Dame has a significant advantage over Ohio State on the defensive line. Maybe that changes, kind of like what we talked about receiver with Notre Dame. The defensive line could be the flip of that now that they have a better defensive coordinator. Linebacker, advantage Notre Dame, significant advantage for Notre Dame. Even with some of the issues Notre Dame had last year, I'll take J.D. Bertrand over anybody that Ohio State's trotting out there. I'll take Jack Kaiser over most of the guys that Ohio State has had. And I'll definitely take a healthy Maris Luafau over anybody that Ohio State has. And then, of course, Notre Dame has a great freshman linebacker class, as does Ohio State. So those kind of negate each other. But when you look at the veterans, it's not even close. Notre Dame has a significantly better linebacker situation than Ohio State. Safety, it's close. I think Ohio State has more proven players. They have more guys that I'm like, okay, that guy has done this, that guy's done that. Whereas some of Notre Dame's proven players haven't played that well. DJ Brown, Houston Griffith. I like the young up and coming talent that Notre Dame has with Rowan Henderson and Xavier Watt. So there's a little bit of uncertainty and projection for Notre Dame or Ohio State. It's like, well, I know who they are. I don't know how much better they're going to be, but I know who they are. I call that a bit of a wash. The reason is Ohio State has more guys that I know who they are. Notre Dame doesn't. I think the reason I say wash, maybe slight advantage Notre Dame, is the fact that I think the upside of Notre Dame's players is higher, plus the presence of Brandon Joseph, who was a consensus All-American 2 years ago, played against Ohio State in the Big Ten championship game, had an interception in the end zone of Justin Fields in that game as well. So I'd say wash, maybe a slight advantage to Notre Dame, but again, I think that at some point the proven nature of what the safeties of Ohio State have done, and they're not proven to be great, they're just solid, gives them an advantage. And then a cornerback, that's the interesting one. So I know most people are going to go Ohio State. I'm not. I'm not impressed with Ohio State's corners. I know Denzel Burke's a good player. He's got a lot to prove to me. Cam Smith gets a lot of love. Not sure why. Cam Hart's the best corner of either of those groups. I'm going wash because I think, again, Ohio State has more guys that have kind of proven to be solid players. I think Notre Dame has better depth. So, secondary wise, it's a bit of a wash to me. I think Notre Dame, however, in my opinion, has the two best players in Cam Hart and Brandon Joseph. I think Ohio State has more guys that have proven that they can be at least solid players, but they struggled last year. That's an area where you expect Jim Knowles' presence to make them better. And so that should help. But I think Notre Dame still has the two best players. So quarterback, advantage Ohio State. Running back, advantage Ohio State. Receiver, advantage Ohio State. Tight end, advantage Notre Dame. Offensive line, advantage Notre Dame. Defensive line, advantage Notre Dame. Linebacker, advantage Notre Dame. And then secondary, wash. So for me, that's 4 for Notre Dame, 3 for Ohio State, and then 2 that are a wash, safety, corner. If you put them all as a secondary, the thing that where I would give Ohio State an advantage to kind of maybe tie this thing up a little bit is I have a lot of concerns about Notre Dame's operation when it comes to the kicking operation. I'm very concerned about Notre Dame's punting and in place kicking situation. And Ohio State to me, they have some questions as well. I'm actually looking up to see if their kicker came back. I know he was listed as a senior last year, but as we all know, those things because of COVID, those things are a little bit jacked up. Yeah, so Noah Ruggles is still on their roster, so that to me gives Ohio State an advantage there. He was a steady player last year, 20 of 21 on field goals, 74 of 74 on extra points. Doesn't have a strong leg, but he's got a consistent leg, a steady leg, which I think is something that Notre Dame doesn't have right now, obviously. So I would give them the advantage. And then, of course, their punter's back. So I would give Ohio State an advantage when it comes to the kicking operation. The return game, both have some talent, both are inconsistent. Coverage wise, I'd probably give a slight edge to Notre Dame based on what I saw last year. But they're going to both be athletic and long and have talented players running down there. So a lot of it depends on just the coaching aspect. But that's one where I'd give an advantage to Ohio State. So I think Notre Dame stacks up a lot better than people think. And I think a big part of the reason why a lot of people don't think Notre Dame stacks up is simply because of recruiting. I think people look at 5-star here, not 5-star there, so they must be better. When in reality, Notre Dame's non-5-star, non-top 100 recruits have been significantly better college football players than the 5-star kids from Ohio State.